The rain had just stopped, leaving the road slick and shining like glass. The air smelled of wet asphalt and gasoline, a scent that always made Ilya feel alive. He twisted the throttle, letting the motorcycle surge forward. The wind hit his face, cold and sharp, but he smiled. For him, speed wasn't just excitement, it was life itself. He was 28. Tall, strong, the kind of man who carried confidence without even trying. Since childhood, he had been told that winners never slow down, so he didn't. He worked in a car dealership, dreamed of opening his own garage, spent weekends on the track or riding into the mountains. He loved the sound of the engine, and the silence that followed when the world fell behind him. That evening, the sky was still heavy with storm clouds. A call buzzed in his pocket. He slowed for a second, looked at the screen. Nadia. He smiled. She was the opposite of him. Calm, thoughtful. A woman who measured life in quiet moments, not kilometers per hour. They had been together for a year. Sometimes she'd wait for him at the garage, reading a book while he worked on the bike. Sometimes they'd ride together at sunset, her hands resting lightly on his jacket, the wind catching strands of her hair. She had told him once, "You can't keep outrunning life, Ilya. One day it'll catch you." He laughed. Let it try. He never got to answer that line. The crash came out of nowhere. A blinding light, a horn, then the world turning upside down. Metal screamed, asphalt tore against skin, and then nothing. When he opened his eyes again, everything was white. Walls, ceiling, light. For a moment he thought he was dead. Then the beeping of a heart monitor pulled him back into his body. He tried to move, nothing. Tried again. His arms responded barely. His legs, nothing. An icy wave of panic crawled up his spine. The door opened. A doctor entered, middle-aged, tired eyes, practiced calm. "Good you're awake," the man said. "You've been through a serious accident." Ilya's throat was dry. "My legs. I can't feel them." The doctor hesitated. "You've injured your spinal cord. We'll do everything we can. The outcome will depend on you." "Depend on me?" The phrase echoed in his head like an insult. He turned his eyes to the ceiling. Outside the window, sunlight flickered through the blinds, ordinary light for an ordinary day. For Ilya, time had stopped. Days blurred together. Nurses came and went. Machines beeped. The world became a quiet hum. Sometimes Nadia visited. She would sit by the bed, her hands clasped together, her eyes full of things she couldn't say. "You're strong, Ilya. You'll walk again." "Don't," he said. His voice was flat. "Don't what?" "Don't pretend. Look at me. This is it." She wanted to argue, but there was nothing to fight against. He turned away. "You should go. Please." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll come back." "Don't." When the door closed, the room felt heavier, emptier, colder. He didn't cry, not then. That came later, when the silence became unbearable. Outside, spring was turning into summer. From his bed, he could see a hospital garden, an old apple tree, benches, people moving slowly in the sunlight. He stared at them for hours, unable to decide whether he envied or pitied them. He thought about the way his life used to sound. The roar of the engine, laughter, music. Now, there was only the steady rhythm of the monitor beside him. He was alive, but it didn't feel like living. That morning, the door opened again. A woman stepped in, not one of the usual nurses. Her voice was calm, even. "Good morning. I'm Liza. I'll be taking care of you today." "Great," he muttered. "Another person here to tell me how lucky I am to be alive?" She smiled faintly. "No. I'm just here to do my job." "That's refreshing." She adjusted the four, checked the monitors. Before leaving, she looked at him and said, "Try to focus on what still works, not what doesn't. It's harder than it sounds." Then she left, and for some reason, the air in the room felt different. For the first time in weeks, Ilya didn't just stare at the ceiling. He listened to the hum of life outside the window. Something inside him shifted, barely noticeable, like the first breath after a long time underwater. He didn't know it yet, but that was the moment he began to live again. The days bled into one another. Gray mornings, quiet afternoons, sleepless nights. Pain became a kind of background noise, like the hum of the fluorescent light above his bed. Every day someone told him he was lucky to be alive. He started to hate that word. Lucky. Liza didn't use it. She came every morning at 8 sharp, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled neatly above her elbows. Her hands were strong but gentle, her movements precise. She never spoke too much, never forced small talk. That was what made him listen when she did speak. "How are you feeling today?" she asked once, adjusting the blanket. "The same. Still broken." "No," she said. "Just not finished yet." He looked at her, surprised. There was something in her tone. Not pity, but challenge. Rehabilitation began like torture. His muscles screamed from disuse. His mind rebelled at every failed attempt. At first, he refused the exercises altogether. What was the point? He couldn't even sit up without help. One day, Liza came in with a man in a wheelchair, older, broad-shouldered, wearing a military sweater. "This is Nikolai," she said. "He's going to show you a few things." "Like what?" "Like how not to give up." The man grinned. "You think life's over, son? I used to think that too. Then I realized my legs don't work, but my head still does. So I started using it." Ilya didn't answer, but something about the man's blunt honesty stayed with him. That night he couldn't sleep. His body hurt, but his mind wouldn't stop moving. The next morning, Liza found him already awake. "I want to try again," he said. She nodded, as if she'd been waiting for those words. Progress was slow, painfully slow. He learned to shift his weight, to balance his torso, to move from bed to chair. Each small victory cost him a flood of sweat and curses. But Liza never flinched, never let him wallow in frustration. "You're angry because you care," she said once. "That's good. Indifference is worse. You sound like you've done this before. Too many times. And you still believe people can change? If they want to." He looked at her, realizing he didn't know anything about her life. Not even if she was married, or what she did when she wasn't here. But maybe it didn't matter. In this small world of pain and effort, she was the only constant. Weeks passed. He started talking to other patients, people whose stories were far worse than his. A young boy who'd lost his legs in a car accident. A woman recovering from a stroke. They laughed together sometimes. Felt strange at first, to laugh again. One afternoon, Liza caught him smiling and said quietly, "There. That's the man I remember from your file photo." "You looked at my file?" "Of course. I like to know who I'm fighting for." That night, lying in bed, Ilya stared at the ceiling and felt something new. Not hope exactly, but the memory of it. By autumn, he could move his wheelchair down the corridor on his own. He'd memorized every squeak of its wheels, every uneven tile on the floor. The first time he reached the garden outside, the air hit him like freedom, cold, sharp, alive. Leaves were falling. The air smelled of rain and soil. Liza followed him out, arms crossed, watching quietly as he looked up at the sky. "Feels different out here," he said. "It's the same sky," she replied. "No," he shook his head. "Not when you've been staring at ceilings for months." She smiled, that small, knowing smile that had become his compass. Later, as the sun dipped low, she wheeled him back inside. He stopped her by the door. "Why do you do this?" he asked. "Day after day, all this pain, all these people who might never get better?" She thought for a moment. "Because sometimes one of them does. And that's enough." That night, he couldn't stop thinking about her words. He realized that what she'd given him wasn't medicine or therapy. It was belief. A quiet, stubborn kind of faith that refused to die. He turned his head toward the window. The city lights shimmered through the glass, blurred by the fog of his breath. And for the first time since the accident, Ilya whispered to himself, Maybe I can make it." Winter came early that year. The mornings were pale and cold, and frost painted the hospital windows like delicate lace. By then, Ilya had learned to move on his own, slowly, painfully, but with purpose. He spent hours in the therapy hall, pushing, lifting, falling, and rising again. The sound of effort had become his new heartbeat. Liza was always near, steady, quiet, demanding. She never let him take shortcuts, never allowed self-pity to creep in. "One more time," she'd say when his arms trembled. "I can't. You said that yesterday, and look where you are now." Sometimes he hated her for that, for believing in him more than he did himself. But in that frustration lived something alive, a will that refused to vanish. By spring he could stand, just for a few seconds, holding the bars with both hands. But those seconds felt like eternity. His legs trembled, his breath broke, his eyes burned with tears, and still he stood. "Look at you," Liza whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. "Don't cry," he said, laughing through exhaustion. "That's my job." "I'm not crying," she said, wiping her eyes. "You are." It was the first real laugh he'd had in months. When he finally left the rehabilitation center, the world felt strange. The noise of the city, the rush of people, the smell of coffee from the corner cafe. Everything seemed louder, brighter, more alive. He didn't walk yet, but he moved, in his wheelchair, confident, aware. Every day he went outside, even when it rained. He wanted to feel everything he had once taken for granted. He stayed in touch with the center, helping new patients, sharing his story. And people listened. They asked questions, cried, laughed, thanked him. He didn't see himself as an inspiration. He simply wanted to remind others that life could start again, even after it breaks. Months later, he returned to the center to deliver a talk. When he entered the hall, Liza was there, waiting. Same calm smile, same quiet strength. "You didn't think you could escape me that easily, did you?" she said. "Never crossed my mind," he smiled. After his talk, they walked, or rather, he rolled through the garden. The apple trees were blooming again, white petals drifting like snow. "You know," he said, "I used to look at these trees and feel nothing, just pain. Now they make me want to breathe." "That's because you're living again," she said softly. "No," he replied. "It's because someone taught me how." Liza didn't answer, just looked at him with that quiet warmth that needed no words. Time passed. Ilya began to walk short distances with crutches. Every step was a battle, but also a victory. He and Liza grew closer, bound by something deeper than gratitude. Not romance born of pity, but of shared struggle, of two people who had seen the worst and still chose to believe in the best. A year later, they got married. No lavish ceremony. Just close friends, a few flowers, and sunlight spilling through the windows. When they exchanged rings, Ilya whispered, "You gave me my life back." Liza smiled, her eyes bright. "No. You just finally decided to live it." Years rolled on quietly. They opened a rehabilitation center together, a place not of despair, but of beginnings. Patients came in broken and left walking, or at least smiling. Every time someone stood for the first time, Ilya felt that same tremor in his chest, that same fragile miracle. One evening, he came home to find Liza sitting by the window, holding a small child, their son. The boy giggled as she lifted him into the air. Ilya stood in the doorway, watching, smiling. He had once thought happiness was speed, the rush of wind, the noise of engines. Now he knew happiness was here, in the quiet sound of laughter, in the warmth of a home, in the simple act of standing on his own 2 feet. He crossed the room, kissed his wife, and lifted his son into his arms. The child's tiny hands gripped his shoulders with absolute trust. "He'll walk sooner than I did," Ilya said. "Yes," Liza whispered, "but only because his father showed him how." That night, when the house was asleep, Ilya sat at his desk and opened an old notebook, the same one from the hospital. He wrote, "Sometimes life breaks you so it can rebuild you stronger. Pain is not the end, it's the beginning of understanding. I thought I had lost everything, but I found everything that truly matters." He closed the notebook and looked out the window. The stars were bright, scattered across the night like tiny promises. He took a slow breath and smiled. He was not running anymore. He was standing. And he was home. 10 years later, The air in the city felt different, warmer, lighter, as if life itself had softened around him. The new rehabilitation center stood on the edge of town, filled with glass and sunlight. On the walls hung photographs of patients who had come through its doors, faces of effort, courage, victory. Some still walked with canes, some rolled in wheelchairs, but all of them smiled the same way, as if they had made peace with gravity. Ilya walked slowly down the corridor, a cane in his hand. Each step was measured, steady. He didn't rush anymore, he didn't need to. The hallway opened into a bright room where a group of young trainees listened to a speaker. When he entered, the room fell silent. Someone whispered, "That's him." He still wasn't used to being seen as an example. He smiled lightly. "Good morning," he said. "My name is Ilya. 10 years ago I couldn't stand. Now I can. But that's not the miracle. The real miracle is that I wanted to." He saw the way they listened, not out of curiosity, but out of hope. People think strength is about muscles or courage or never falling. It's not. Strength is what you find when there's nothing left to hold on to. It's the moment you stop asking why me and start saying what next. It's when you learn that standing isn't about legs. It's about will. Silence filled the room, the kind that doesn't need applause. "You'll all face your own storms," he continued. "You'll fall, you'll doubt, you'll curse. That's fine. Just don't stay there. The floor is for resting, not for living." A few people laughed softly through tears. He ended with a simple line. "I thought I'd lost everything that made me who I was. Turns out, I was only shedding the weight of what didn't matter." After the session, he stepped outside. The evening sun painted the city gold. Liza waited near the car, their son, now 10, kicking a ball on the grass. The sound of laughter drifted through the air. She looked at him with that same quiet smile she'd had the first day they met. "How did it go?" "Better than I expected," he said. "They listened." "Of course they did." "No," he said, shaking his head. "They heard." They stood together for a moment, watching their son chase the ball until it rolled toward Ilya's feet. He bent slowly, picked it up, and tossed it back. The boy caught it easily and shouted, "See, Dad? You're faster than you think." Ilya laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from deep inside, the kind that only people who face the edge truly know. He slipped his arm around Liza's shoulders. "You know," he said softly, "for the longest time, I wanted to go back to who I was, back to that road before the crash. But now, I wouldn't change a thing." "I know," she said, "because now you're truly alive." They stood there, watching the sunset fade into dusk. The sky burned orange and violet, the same colors it had the day he first learned to stand. And somewhere inside him, beneath the scars, beneath the ache, there was peace. That night, when the house was quiet, he opened his old notebook once more. The pages were yellowed at the edges, filled with shaky handwriting. He turned to the last blank page and wrote slowly, "We are not measured by how we fall, but by how many times we choose to rise. Life is fragile, yes, but so are wings, and yet they fly." He closed the notebook, placed it on the shelf, and switched off the light. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees. Not a storm, not a roar, just a whisper. The sound of peace, the sound of life continuing. If you ever lose your way, remember, falling isn't failure. It's the universe teaching you how to rise higher. You don't need to walk fast. You just need to keep moving, one heartbeat at a time. Thank you for being with me until the end. If you enjoyed the story, please support it with a like and leave your comments. There are many more stories to come.